Hello, I'm Charlie Rossiter, and welcome to Poetry Spoken Here on YouTube. We're the longest running all poetry interview podcast in existence. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. But you don't have to wait for YouTube uploads. You can also download the show from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy the show.
Hello, this is producer and technical director Jack Rossiter Munley with a special note. The music you'll hear on today's podcast was provided by Chicago-based harpist Yomi. She's been a harpist for 14 years, but she began focusing on writing original music 2 years ago. Her first release, 33 Strings, came out in January of this year. She describes that work as about as honest of a debut as I could get. I wanted it to be my voice, my experiences, my harp, and nothing more. Her next albums will feature more experimental music, pushing the boundaries of what a harp can be. The piece you will hear throughout today's podcast is called Prologue, and it is from her debut, 33 Strings. Stay tuned at the end of the podcast to hear the piece in its entirety. If you want to hear more of her work, check her out on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/LilYomi. That's soundcloud.com/LIL-YOMI. Enjoy.
Our feature today is Lori Desrosiers, a much-published Pushcart Prize nominee who edits the Naugatuck River Review, a journal of narrative poetry. She teaches at several institutions of higher learning, including in the Interdisciplinary Studies program for Lesley University's MFA. And she has a brand new book from Salmon Poetry called Sometimes I Hear the Clock Speak. And we're going to talk about that book and hear some poems. So welcome to Poetry Spoken Here.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm very happy to be here.
All right. And let me ask you something, which I don't know. This is a question wouldn't have occurred to me last week, but I heard the poet laureate give a reading, and he talked about putting books together, how people do it in different ways. So I'm just curious with How I Hear the Clock Speak, how did you make the book what it is?
I think I was kind of purposeful about it when I was writing. I had this idea to write about music, and I like to write a lot of ekphrasis or poetry about art and music. And so I thought it would be interesting to write a series of poems that somehow interacted with music or the experience of music. So most of the poems in that book speak to one another because they're about a lot of the same kind of things. And then somehow it also ended up being about time and about memory, because all of those things interrelate to me. And so that's what the book, all those poems ended up looking like.
Okay, so you were kind of purposeful before the book was finished. You didn't just find poems and slap them together. He was saying that it was reminding me, I guess, and everyone, that it used to be the norm that people would just gather up whatever they had, if they had enough to make a book, and that was the book. But nowadays, doing what you did is much more common, and people like the thematic idea, I think, or we're getting used to it.
For me, it's kind of like being driven to write to something, maybe an overarching theme of some sort. The first book I wrote was when I was in the MFA program at New England College, in which I graduated from in 2008. And when I was writing, one day my grandmother sprung up out of my poem that I was writing, it felt like, and she said, write about me. And so I wrote a series of poems because I had to, because I felt like it was an imperative about my grandmother, my mother, and myself. And it was a little chapbook called Three Vanities. and because my family had a great deal of character, I have to say. And then the first full-length book that I wrote, The Philosopher's Daughter, was sort of a departure from that. There were some memory poems, some family poems still. I was writing about my father's death, who was a professor of philosophy who died of brain cancer. And I had, there were a few pieces in there that were about music that I took a little, an epigraph from some words from a song, and ended up, and that poem one of those poems won a prize, and I was so excited about it. And it seemed to me that was a calling, and when I got The Philosopher's Daughter published, which was my first book, full-length book, was also with Salmon. I started to write, all these poems that were sort of from that theme, and so that was propelling me along for quite a long time. I mean, 2 or 3 years of writing to come up with this book. So it's been a lot of fun.
Why don't we hear one of these poems to get started here?
Well, I'm going to read you an ekphrastic poem, this one's about a sculpture, but some of this is sort of the same feel that you get. It's called The Balance Stone, and it's after a sculpture of the same name by Isamu Noguchi. There used to be another stone. The ghost stone is not there above the stone that is. The stone that is on the roof of the building where air passes through windows that are not there. Like the quartz gathered in the woods near the house a child used to live in, who used to be me. The ghost of the child is balanced on the roof of what I have forgotten.
How did you come to that? Did you start with that imagining what's not there?
Yeah, it's this, the sculpture itself kind of was my prompt. I have this prompt, and I was looking at it, and it's just these like stone feet, and then there's a roof. There's literally a roof. It looks like a little roof on top. And I read about this sculpture, and there's a piece of quartz on top of the roof, and the placard that came with the sculpture said that there used to be another stone on top of that piece of quartz, but that the artist had taken it away. And I started to think of how this ghost of this stone is like there, that there was something, and then there was not something, but yet it used to be there. In fact, right now, I have to admit, I'm working on a series of poems about things that aren't there. That's going to be in another 3 years. You'll have to wait for that book.
Right. This fits with what you're saying about being interested in memory, and how, well, the experience really was there, but now it's not there. Something like that.
Exactly. This idea of the shadows of the things that we were. My mother is aging. She's 92, and I'm starting to see gaps, in her memory that are reminding me of that. So I'm also writing about that sort of not there. I'm writing about ghosts and things that are lost, and people that are lost. And I mean, it's really interesting. I'm having fun. But that's the next project. Obviously, we're always more interested in the project we're working on than the one we just finished, but that's okay.
How about one of the music poems?
Oh, I would love that. That would be great. Okay, I'll read you my violin. My violin has been tucked in the closet for years. Black case, green plush interior, bridge broken, strings gone, hairless bow on a hook. Long gone are days of before school orchestra, after school lessons, brown mark under my chin. Took up guitar, forgot the violin. You can't sing with a violin, and no talent, so I thought. Years later, a friend's violin sitting out, Scheherazade on the music stand, asked if I could try. It was one we played. So shocked, I almost dropped the instrument. She explained it was the violin. If only I had known all those years in high school when I sounded worse than everyone else, no matter how hard I practiced. It was my student violin that lacked resonance, not I.
That's a hell of a story.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa. What a realization, huh?
It took me, 30 years to figure that out.
You need those role models
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
your and in your head. You need those.
And don't be afraid to
things.
stand up in front of people and read your poems. It's a
Right.
lot of fun, and it'll build your confidence. Poetry audiences, I have tried all sorts of things standing in front. I love being, I'm a bit of a ham. I like standing in front of people doing things. I've tried singing and playing guitar. I've tried theater. I've done stand-up comedy a little bit. And honestly, poetry audiences are the absolute best. They're very appreciative and they're kind. And I'll never do stand-up again.
They are not necessarily appreciative and kind.
Yeah.
But with poetry, yeah, if you're going to go to a poetry reading, you've got a certain attitude underlying your approach to life, I think. Especially if you're going to an open mic, you've got to be an accepting person.
Yeah.
If you're going to go to an open mic and expect to have an enjoyable time, and just
Nice.
appreciate expression that people give you.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, what would you like to read next?
I think I have up, let's see. Oops, where'd it go? All right. I have up a poem that I think you'll enjoy, Charlie. It's called Guitars.
Oh, yeah.
I believe in strum and riff, in the medley of pluck and thrum, in strings pulled taut to tune, finessed with finger picks or tickled with steel for a slide, in the dring of a chord, the vibration of hammer-on. I believe in a good fake book. At the midnight jam, I'll bring my axe, you bring yours. We'll play St. James Infirmary and Uncle John's band until the sun comes up over the Hudson or the Ohio.
Yeah, there are a lot of fun little references in there. Good old St. James
I'm a
Infirmary.
folk person. I grew up in the Hudson Valley. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
I was born in Manhattan and grew up in Hastings-on-Hudson, and we used to go up to Tarrytown to the Hudson River Sloop concerts and watch Pete Seeger and Arlo Guthrie when I remember when he was like 17 playing guitar.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to me that's sort of it's part of my roots and who I am.
There's still a great folk thing weekend that happens in, I think it's in Voorheesville at the fairgrounds.
Oh yeah.
I forget what it's called.
Right, old Songs Festival.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew that. How about that?
A fun event. I like those places where you just amble in for a while, wander over to another tent. It's just such a pleasant way to spend a day. Yeah, this has lots of little references to St. James Infirmary, the Ohio, of course, out of the song. And
I love St. James Infirmary.
By the way, where do you live now? I know you're in, I call it Western Mass, but you're not really west.
I live in Westfield, Mass.
Oh, okay.
It's not too far from Northampton. It's about 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
I get it. Yeah. And you do a wonderful thing. You do this newsletter, the Poetry News, which I just love it when people do that sort of thing, though. It's just a charitable thing that you do. You put out this monthly calendar of events in your area. That's just great.
Yeah, it started out as like, an email to everybody, every week. I used to email and say, this is what's going on, folks. And I knew poets in Connecticut. I thought the poets in Connecticut might be interested in what the poets in Massachusetts were doing. But it turned out that mostly it was just the poets in Massachusetts. But I used to do it every week. I did it every week for about 12 years.
Wow.
And then I said, wait a minute, if I do it monthly, I'll work less hard on this thing.
Right.
I just changed to monthly this year. It's been great.
Well, it's a great service. And though most people don't travel for the events, some people do. And that's just kind of neat. Yeah. Because you do bring in some folks from elsewhere to
it's on a website.
a different voice. Yeah.
So people can just go there. It's poetrynews.wordpress.com. And
There
it's
you go.
nice to see, things. And I have links to other poetry and other places there. I have some links to, I know I have links to Albany Poets, which was your
Connection,
hometown
yeah.
over there, and a lot of other Boston poetry, different things.
Great. Well, what about now? You teach an interdisciplinary program. Does that make you do anything differently? I'm noticing this poem about the bar where the physicists drink it. That made me
No, that was not about teaching. That was actually because I was in Cape Cod and I went to the British Beer Company one day and I met 3 physicists in the same night who didn't know each other. It was just funny. And I like physics. My math is terrible, so I've never been able to really sit down and do it. But I have a cousin who's a physics professor, and some friends who are physicists. So I wrote the poem after going to one of these Physics for Dummies websites to double check everything.
Oh,
And then I sent it to my friends and to my cousin to make sure I was right. And they proofread it, the physics part for me, not the poetry
right.
part. And would you like me to read that?
Yeah. Yeah. I was
All right, let
thinking
me.
it was some kind of conference, how it is in the hotel bar. That's how you get a lot of
Yeah, it
people
does sound kind of like it could do that.
from
All
the
right.
same. You get people from the same discipline that way. Anyway, that's a great background, though.
Okay, hold on. Okay. I mentioned physics a few times in my poems. This is only going to be funny if you know a little bit about physics, but I love it when I have a group, an audience, and I find some physics majors in there, and they're always falling on the floor by the end of the poem, and everybody else is looking at them.
Do you want to tell us about a couple of things ahead of time, or maybe elucidate afterward? What would be better?
I don't think so because
Okay, let it ride.
I honestly can't explain these past what's in the poem.
Okay.
So that's that.
Nobody ever said you're supposed to understand everything in a poem.
No.
You don't
So
hear every
all
note
good.
in a symphony, So
So for all you physicists out there in internet world, here we go. The bar where the physicists drink is a simple old place that serves Guinness. They sip in sync with the universe, calculate the time it takes for heads to dissolve into golden lager, observe the centrifugal force of bar stool turns, the trigonometry of dart throws, comment on the waitress, whether she exists in time and space while she is on break, the centripetal force of her inert body leaning against the outside wall, inhaling molecules of smoke, debating if her curvature is equal to her curves. They don't order martinis, but if they did, they might contemplate Pascal's second law of hydrostatics, how an olive affects a change of pressure in a homogeneous, incompressible fluid. They drink their beers, join the flow of charge as the current of money quickly ebbs. When the conjugate quantity of beer consumed is equivalent to the linear movement of time wasted, they declare this system closed and depart, leaving a sense of relative uncertainty at every table.
I never thought about there being a difference between curvature and curve.
Ah, it's a big difference.
What's curvature?
To measure my curves, you need to understand curvature. If you know calculus, you have to measure curvatures of motion.
Oh, okay. Well, I learned something, and I'll have to go to Wikipedia to learn some more. Well, we can go back to more like familiar territory, like the anniversary poem. We don't need special knowledge for this one, I don't think.
This is a poem for my husband, Gary. Anniversary. 15 years ago, we stood before sunflowers, pushing their seedy faces up the shed's outer wall, our feet immersed in dandelion clover, pledged from this day forward to plant bulbs in spring, tulips, daylilies, and irises, push marigold and daisy seeds into black summer soil, build towers for tomatoes, grids for zucchini, cucumber, peas, vowed to sit in Adirondack chairs, watch cedar waxwings devour the juniper berries, to hang thistle for goldfinch, suet for woodpeckers from blue spruce branches. Today, we take the bulbs from their dark winter storage beneath the spades and rakes, gently place them beneath the ground. Another year, as promised.
There's a nice toned poem about a long-term relationship, it
Thank
seems to
you.
me. You know, that's what really comes through to me, the tone of it.
I'm not much of a gardener. He's the gardener.
Oh,
Isn't that
Oh.
interesting?
you get off easy. Just need to be an enthusiastic
Oh, it's beautiful.
appreciator. Yeah,
I
no,
am
that's
the
cool.
appreciator of the beauty of the garden.
That sounds good. I always say there's not much point in going around and grabbing the ring on the merry-go-round unless you have somebody watching you do it. Isn't that why? Hey, look, Mom, I got the ring.
Yeah.
You need an audience. You when you read your poems, it's exceptionally clear. Do you talk to your students about that at all? About do they read? Do you make
About
them
reading,
get up and read? Yeah,
most of them do read out. I mean, by the time you get to grad school, you usually
that's
come
true.
from there.
Yeah.
But I do, I do also interact with a lot of younger poets, and I go to open mics and I read at open mics and I read. I feature a lot at open mics, and I came from it. I used to host an open mic for 7 years. I was the co-host of an open mic here in Westfield, and we had a lot of really young poets coming through, teenagers to adult, and young adults, young old people, haha, like you and me. But I think learning to slow down is something a lot of the younger folks have a problem with. They get nervous, so they get up to the mic and they rush through the poem. And I've learned that if you read carefully, that people can hear it. You want them to know what you're saying. I mean, I don't go too slowly.
We can wrap it up with the title poem. How did that get to be the title poem?
Oh, I had a whole bunch of titles before I hit that one, and I ran them by my publisher, and she liked this one better. That's how that works.
Okay, well, it's get your attention, and you wonder what in the world is that about.
Well, one of them was a time signature, which I thought was nice, but she said was too cliched, which I agree. I think it was, and I don't even remember what the first title was, but this one works.
Okay.
So let me read. Sometimes I hear the clock speak. A knock and sequence, hands unsuccessful, reach for numbers. 12 hovers atop a round white mountain. Long sweeping curve of shrug, a gesture in one direction. The hiccup of a second, the thousand spins of a life.
And is this a particular clock in your life, or did this just come to you with thinking of clocks?
Yeah, I was just thinking about time going by and how clocks, it's fun. I like this idea of the white space in a clock and the white space in a poem. Does that make sense? That they both use their white space for something, like this idea of the shrug of the clock, it keeps going, and it's almost like it's like a poem in a way, because it touches on different things. It's very sparse. A clock is very sparse the way it seems haiku like to me. A clock, it's like a Japanese form or something, and it hits the numbers and they all mean different things. Every time it hits a number, it doesn't mean one, it means I'm fast asleep, or it means it's time for lunch, or you know what I mean? There's all these different, maybe I'll write another clock poem with that in it.
That's great. Yeah, the clock is a haiku. That is a very cool idea. Yeah. And in a way, as you were reading this, I was thinking, in a way, this is like an ekphrastic poem. If it were a work of art, the clock, you look at it, you kind of describe it, and then, of course, your mind riffs off of what you're looking at and describing, and you get other ideas and things, and you end
There's
up with an
an
ekphrastic poem,
absolutely. So,
Yeah,
and it is because there are so many beautiful clocks, and
that's true.
they are works of art. Absolutely. I love clocks.
All right. Well, Lori, thanks a lot for being here on Poetry Spoken here. It's been really good to hear your poems and talk about your new book. And just thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me, Charlie.
You're listening to Poetry Spoken here. I'm joined now by Sarah Browning. She's co-founder and executive director of a wonderful organization in Washington, D.C. known as Split This Rock. In addition to their many programs, they do a biannual poetry festival. The organization, in its mission statement, says that it cultivates, teaches, and celebrates poetry that bears witness to injustice and provokes social change. So, Sarah, I'm really glad you can be here to tell us more about Split This Rock.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Why don't we just start out with you saying a little more about what the organization's about and maybe where it came from? Did it start with a festival, or did the organization happen?
Yeah. Absolutely. So thank you for reading the short version of the mission statement. We believe that poetry has work to do in the world, both for us as individuals to open our hearts and also to build community among us. And in America, this is so essential right now as we're being driven apart by fear-mongering and hate-mongering in the public sphere. And poetry can remind us what we have in common and help us learn about our differences and really build bridges amongst our common humanity. It's just essential today. And Split This Rock was born out of this desire to have a home for poets who write this kind of work that breaches our differences, that struggles with the world, that names injustice, but also a forum for them to speak out. And so, yes, we started actually with the festival. The very first festival was in March of 2008, and it was timed to coincide with the 5th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. Split This Rock emerged from Poets Against the War organizing that a group of us were doing here in DC, and we felt compelled, being in the Capitol, to expand the work beyond the issue of the war, because of course it's connected to all sorts of other social issues, but also beyond our own borders here, to welcome others from around the country to come to the Capitol to speak out and to meet one another. People doing amazing work all over the country. And we've grown since then. The festival is every other year, as you mentioned. So this will be our 5th. It's going to be an amazing gathering. The dates are April 14th to the 17th this year.
Okay. And on the 13th, the night before, I read that you have a very special event at the Library of Congress.
That's right. Juan Felipe Herrera, who is our nation's poet laureate and has been just an extraordinary poet laureate, bringing people to poetry who never thought of themselves as poetry lovers, who didn't know that they loved poetry until they were introduced to the incredible vibrancy that is American poetry today by Juan Felipe. And he will be kicking off Split This Rock Poetry Festival with a special program at the Library of Congress on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And it's free and open to the public. Everyone's invited. It's a great way to launch 4 days of this kind of poetry that is democratic, that is small d democratic, that is welcoming, that builds community.
And if anyone listening is going to go, you want to go early, because I just saw him in Milwaukee and it was an overflow crowd. The Library of Congress is a great place to see a poetry reading. It's a great auditorium.
Yeah.
Now, I was looking at the program and noticing, I don't want to get too specific here because people can go look at it at splitthisrock.org, but the poetry of caregiving, new Black femininity, a poetic panel that's in response to Hakeem Adabudi asking, who owns the earth? I love that because I think Madhubhuti is so good,
Yes.
It's-
Yeah, the lineup, I mean, the diversity of conversations and themed group readings this year just astonishes me. I mean, we received more than double the proposals that we could accept. And even we probably took too many because we were so enthusiastic about the breadth of conversations. There's a farm worker reading. There's queer poets who live in the border regions of Texas and Mexico, Latino. There are several panels actually about Black women. After so many years of attention to the plight of Black men in this country, the Black women stepped up and said, it's time to talk about our experiences too. And so that is really at the forefront of this festival. There's also a number of eco-justice panels, that is, including the one you mentioned, that is poetry that addresses the intersection of the environment and other social issues, environmental racism, the ways that poor communities are especially destroyed through the pursuit of profit. So those are exciting panels to me as well.
And structurally, I'm noticing as sometimes festivals or conferences work, at any one time, there are multiple things to choose from, and people will curse the fact they can't be two places at once. But
right, we always get those complaints. But we have featured readings or main stage readings. There are 5 of them over the course of the 4 days. And of course, nothing else is scheduled at that time. And the great poets that we have featuring this year include Ross Gay, who just won the Kingsley Tufts Award, Reginald Dwayne Betts, who's a DC native who was incarcerated for many years and has a stunning new book, Bastards of the Reagan Era. Linda Hogan, the native poet, Aracelis Girmay, Jan Beatty, the spoken word poet. Well, she's mostly known as spoken word poet, Dominic Christina. So it's a really diverse lineup.
Yeah. And I wanted to mention, we want to be sure people know about the festival. And also, you have a mailing list so people can receive a poem of the week. Are there any other things like that people should know about just from the organization?
Yes, thank you. So every Friday morning, we publish a poem, a contemporary poem on a social issue. It can be broadly interpreted. It might not be a kind of direct comment on that issue. They're mostly American poets, but some international, some bilingual, some video, some in text. And all of these poems have been gathered into an online database called The Quarry. And it's over 350 poems, and it is searchable by social issue. So if you're doing an event on the environment or a Black Lives Matter event and you want to read a poem or bring one to your study group or to your worship service or the meeting of your nonprofit organization, please go to splitthisrock.org, click on Poetry Database, and just dive into, sink into, explore this incredible resource. There's nothing like it that's indexed in this way that can help you find poems thematically.
Okay, I thought I knew, but I didn't know about that part of it. I knew the poem of the week, but the
Yes.
accumulation and the indexing, that is absolutely fabulous. Well, do you have any parting words for us as we move along here?
Yes. Well, I invite everyone to Washington, D.C. in April. It's a beautiful month. It's the most beautiful month of the year in D.C. And it's a transformative gathering, nothing like it in the country, at the intersection of poetry and social justice. So if you can get on a bus, carpool, crash on a couch, please, you're welcome and invited to join us here in our nation's capital. And thank you so much, Charlie.
Okay, we're listening to Sarah Browning, Executive Director of Split This Rock, and this is Poetry Spoken Here.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Poetry Spoken Here. Remember, Poetry Spoken Here is more than a podcast. You can find us online at poetryspokenhere.com, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/poetryspokenhere, Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/poetryspokenhere. And if you have any suggestions for future shows or would like to send us work of your own to potentially be featured on the podcast, you can reach out to us at poetryspokenhere@gmail.com. Special thanks to Yomi for the use of her song Prelude.